part of the 14th annual CASE, or Creative Arts and Scholarly Engagement Festival, an event sponsored by the Margaret Walker Center here at Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi. The CASE Festival is a student conference that we typically hold in the spring. However, due to COVID-19, we postponed that event. Still, we are so excited to host our keynote speaker, John Jennings, for a talk and virtual exhibit. Now, hopefully the link to the virtual exhibit should be posted on the Margaret Walker Center's Facebook page and the Center's JSU website so that you can access it there. Poet C. Lee McInnes will moderate the Q&A session that will follow the talk. So we hope you'll stick around, that you'll post your questions to Facebook, and we'll be able to have a lively discussion. But before I get to my particular introductions of John and C. Lee, I would be remiss if I did not take a moment to acknowledge that this event would not be possible without grant funding from the Mississippi Arts Commission, the Mississippi Humanities Council, and the Greater Jackson Arts Council, as well as support from the staff of the Margaret Walker Center, including Dr. Robert Luckett, who serves as our director, and Mr. Lance Wheeler, who is the Education and Public Relations Manager for the Margaret Walker Center and the COFO Education Center. He's also our tech person tonight, so we want to give a shout out to him because this would not be possible without his assistance. Now to introduce our keynote speaker. Now there's so much to say about John that I'm going to try to be brief, and I will direct you to his Amazon.com authors page to find out more. But I will tell you that John is a graduate of Jackson State University. He's a graduate of the JSU Honors College as well. He received his MA in Art Education and MFA in Studio with a focus on graphic design from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Jennings is a UC Riverside Professor of Media and Cultural Studies and the co-founder of the Eisner Award-winning collection, The Blacker the Ink, Constructions of Black Identity in Comics and Sequential Art. Jennings' current projects include the horror anthology Box of Bones, the coffee table book titled Black Comics Returns with Damian Duffy, and the Eisner-winning, Bram Stoker-winning, New York Times best-selling graphic novel adaptation of Octavia Butler's classic dark fantasy, Kindred. If you haven't seen it, you absolutely have to check it out. In addition, published just this January in 2020, John also published Parable of the Sower, a graphic novel adaptation in collaboration with Damian Duffy, and it also includes collaboration with Nalo Hopkinson. So if you haven't seen that, again, something you absolutely have to check out. Currently, John is the founder and curator of the Abrams Megascope line of graphic novels. So he has lots that he's bringing to us, both from his own creativity and that of others. So I highly recommend you review his work, get to know him if you don't know him already. Now tonight, John will discuss and display his exhibit, Cyborgs and Crossroads, the speculative design of John Jennings, which will be followed by a Q&A between him and C. Lee McInnes. Serving as our moderator extraordinaire, C. Lee McInnes is a poet, a short story writer, instructor of English at Jackson State University, the former publisher and editor of Black Magnolia's Literary Journal, and the author of numerous books, collections of poetry, short fiction, criticism, and so forth. But he's also one of the co-authors of a work titled Brother Hollis, the Sankofa of a Movement Man, which discusses the life and legendary Mississippi civil rights icon. He is also a former first runner-up of the Amiri Baraka Sonia Sanchez Poetry Award, sponsored by North Carolina A&T, and he edited the Black Magnolia Special Prints issue, which is available now. Hopefully, we'll also get a link to that on the Margaret Walker Center's Facebook page so that you can read that work as well. I have an article in it, so I highly encourage you to check it out. McInnes has presented papers at various local and national conferences. His work has appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, and most recently, he is participating in several virtual events, including moderating another panel discussion with Kiese Lamont, Jerry Ward, and Charlie Braxton titled The Black Boy Conversation, which will take place tomorrow night at 6 p.m. right here on this very Facebook page. So I hope you'll tune in and join the discussion. I look forward to what's coming. So my introduction is done. I am gone, and I turn it over to you, John.
Thank you so much, Helen. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm really, really giddy about being even virtually connected to Jackson State. I'm so heartbroken that I didn't get a chance to actually be there in person. But you know, I pretty much bleed blue and white. So I'm extremely proud to be a graduate of Jackson State University class of '93. As Dr. Crump said earlier, I'm also a graduate of the Du Bois Harvey, Alvarez Harvey Honors College as well. I want to do a quick shout out before I do my talk. Dr. Chalmers Mayers in the art department, Jimmy Mumford, who is also now I think in charge of not only the art department but also theater, and the great Dr. Pamela Hurd, actually too, who is associated with the Honors College now too, who was my math teacher, who taught me intermediary algebra, and in some ways saved my career because I totally flunked it once, and she's a wonderful teacher, and I would not be having this conversation with you without her. So if she's out there listening, thank you so much. I'd like to dedicate the talk to Dr. Harvey, who was our dean of the Honors College when I was there. It was like a mother to me. And also to my late sister, Heidi Burrell, who passed away this past summer from a sudden heart attack. And, very, very, I just want to dedicate this to them. All right, so I'm gonna start talking. So Cyborgs and Crossroads. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. Let me see here. I should be able to, there we go, application window. All right, so I am going to click through this talk quickly. I want to get to conversations. But so Cyborgs and Crossroads, the speculative design of John Jennings. These are two different things that actually kind of, I think, as symbols, really kind of typify some of the work I've been doing. A lot of my work over the last like 12 years or so have been dedicated to what some people would call Afrofuturism or Black speculative culture. So I'm going to start with something that means a great deal to me, being a father. This is my son, Jackson Kirby Jennings. I was born almost 17 months ago. And when we talk about the Afrofuture, we really are talking about the imagining of, Black futures, but also through like storytelling, various types of narratives. And I talk about this theoretically a lot, but once you become a father and you have a little Black boy that you have to raise and put into that Afrofuture, it definitely changes your perspective quite a bit. Now, my son's name is spelled Jaxon. So he's low-key named after Jackson State, where I found a lot of myself. A lot of the John Jennings that exists is because of Jackson State. My name is John, and the familiar term for John is Jack. So Jack's son literally means John's son. So I kind of low-key named after myself. And of course, he's named after Jack Kirby, the co-creator of the Hulk and Captain America and all these different Marvel comics, the X-Men, all that stuff. Jack Kirby is a creator. So his name is Jackson Kirby. My grandfather, Albert, was functionally illiterate, couldn't read or write. And he's the man that raised me. I grew up in Florida, Mississippi, but with my grandparents. And my grandfather, Albert, he signed his name with an X because he couldn't read or write. And so that mark that he would make is what I put in the middle of my son's name as a kind of an homage to him. So I kind of low-key named it after my grandfather as well. But the other thing that an X is a crossroads, right? And that's where everything that's interesting lives. That's where soul music comes from, gospel and R&B, right? Mixed together, Reese's Pieces, chocolate and peanut butter. All the interesting stuff is actually at the intersections. Entire cities, sprung up from like crossroads. The idea of trading ideas. A lot of times we're trying to stay in this parallel track, but when you cross the stream, so to speak, that's when really interesting things happen. All right, so the crossroad is actually kind of a technology to a certain degree. So we're going to get to that. So I came across the term Afrofuturism like 2007 or so. I had just finished being a guest artist at James Madison University in Virginia. And they do this thing where you go and stay with them. I was a diversity scholar in residence. I was the first diversity scholar in residence. And as you know, in the academy, if you put the word diversity into a title, sometimes they'll throw money at it, right? So anyway, so I was the first one, and it was open. It was pretty cool. It was actually open to different types of performance artists and things like that. And part of the deal was you go there, you stay for 2 weeks, and then you come back and you do a show, a performance, or something like that. So I wanted to make up some new work. So I have been really thinking about like techno culture from various standpoints. At the time I was working on I was curating a show at Doshisha University in Japan, and I was thinking about you know, anime and things like that. And I think I fairly recently like reread Donna Haraway's essay, The Cyborg Manifesto. And then I also I would have recently revisited Frantz Fanon's The Fact of Blackness. So I started, all these different things started to come together in my head, and I started thinking about stereotypes quite a bit. As you probably know, the term stereotype comes from the printing parlance from the 1800s. Firmin Didot, who's like from a long line of French printers and paper makers, created this term, the stereotype as a printing technique. We don't really think about stereotyping the way that we think about it today until the 1920s, that Walter Lippmann comes up with this notion of how we basically kind of imprison people in a stereotype. So stereos, the Greek, means hard or fixed. So a lot of times we're trying to fight against this idea of fixity. The stereotype is almost like a clone of ourselves that is put together by systems of power to kind of stop us or fix us or imprison us to a certain degree. So then from a Du Boisian kind of like double consciousness idea, I thought like, well, if you look at a cybernetic organism, the sci-fi trope of like a man machine or woman machine, the fleshy part of the cyborg is how we see ourselves, and the machine part is the kind of socialized fixing, so to speak. So that's kind of like why I came with this idea for this series called Matters of the Fact. And I came up with like 70 or so of these, and they're basically looking at the idea that racialized stereotypes like a jungle bunny or like a ape or what have you they get reproduced and sold back to us constantly. I also thought about the idea that because of the disruption of Ma'afa, the great the enslavement of our people, that actually disrupted progress quite a bit, and so we a lot of times have to create these fictitious connections to Africa, through the buying of stuff like the Chihuahua or like mudcloth or what have you, not really understanding until fairly recently where we come from, or possibly where we come from. So there's this kind of fracturing, and that happens with the Black body too. So that's where all these images came from. So I showed these to a friend of mine, Dana Rush, who's an Africanist, and she said to me, well, these are wonderful and they look very Afrofuturist. And I was like, okay, that is a made-up word that I've never heard. What does that mean? And so I did some research and realized that the term Afrofuturism came from this article by Mark Derry in 1993-94 from this book called Flame Wars that was looking at technoculture from the 90s, the creation of this thing called the World Wide Web, right? This is like how Black people were using technoculture. And it basically looks a lot at like cybernetic prosthetics and the idea of technology and the idea of like alienation through like, through issues around slavery and what have you. The other thing I want to show you is this character, the data thief. So this is a still from this film that came out in 1997 by a Black British filmmaker and scholar named John Akomfrah. The name of the film is The Last Angel of History. And it's a really, really wonderful documentary. I think it's about 88 minutes or something like that. And it basically is talking about Black techno music and techno culture and electronic music. And he's using the data thief as a time traveling archaeologist that's digging through the detritus of time looking for cultural production. It's really amazing. And eventually the character becomes the last angel of history and then is beaming information from the past to the future. So a lot of these ideas around time travel and about science fiction and Blackness is a really big part of Afrofuturism. But there's one part, if you look at the trailer, where the data thief is at the crossroads, and he's invoking the classic folktale of Robert Johnson at the Mississippi Crossroads, where he sells his soul to the quote unquote devil to become a virtuoso at the blues guitar. And he uses the term Black secret technology as a way to think about the blues, which just blows my mind because I never really thought about technology that way. I'm always thinking about, the computer or, other types of technological ideas, but he's really talking about cultural production by Black folk through this notion of like technological equivalence as a type of technology. So I was inspired and I created this show for Jackson State. Actually, it was called Thief at the Crossroads, where I was looking at these blues legends as kind of avatars of this black secret technology. People like Nina Simone, Bessie Smith, Mississippi Fred McAfee. I did about 12 or 13, Howlin' Wolf, you know, and that made me start thinking about what I call a pan-technological ideology, that this is a type of liberation technology, and it starts to kind of expand it the way that I was thinking about technology. Muddy Waters, B.B. King, and I actually showed these at Jackson State when I created them. The other thing that I kind of started thinking about with Afrofuturism as a storytelling mechanism is the notion of Sankofa. This is actually one of the symbols for Sankofa. Of course, the most famous one is a Sankofa bird reaching over its back, grabbing this egg and bringing it forward. Sankofa is basically this Akan term, the Ghanaian people, the Akan. This is an Adinkra stamp. It means go back and get it, or it's never too late to learn from the past. There's various variations of it. I love creating new words. I learned this from Cardwell Ishun's book, More Brilliant Than the Sun, Adventures in Sonic Fiction. The idea of creating what they call neologisms. If you're creating new things, you need to create new terms to kind of describe what you're doing. So, okay, I took the idea of Sankofa and I conflated it with the notion of narration. So I came with this term, Sankofaration. So the idea of reaching back to kind of not only go to the future, but also to kind of like realign traumas from the past to actually fix, because these things are happening simultaneously, right? One thing about Afrofuturism is different from like traditional science fiction is this notion of the future is co-present with the past and also the present. And Lisa Yazik, who's this wonderful scholar at Georgia Tech, states that Afrofuturism also is a reclamation project that's not only thinking about the future, but also about rethinking the history of the future, so to speak. So if you think about like historical films or historical notions of the past, of the future, there's no Black people, there's no brown people, there's no quote unquote other people there. So I started to become very much aligned with Afrofuturism as a space, actually. So my friend Yatasha Womack wrote the first book about it from a very cursory introductory standpoint that was very accessible and wonderful. Afrofuturism, the world of Black sci-fi and fantasy culture. And I was fortunate enough to do the cover for that. Another book that kind of touched on that is The Hip Hop Underground and Afro-American Culture by James Braxton Peterson. And also Octavia's Brood, which basically looked at the idea of science fiction and organization or like community organization being the same kind of thing. And this is a book put together by Adrienne Marie Brown and Walida Amarisha. And I did the cover for these books. Mothership also is a seminal book from the last decade or so, edited by Bill Campbell and Ed Hall, that really was one of the newer collections since Sherry Renee Thomas's book in 2000, Dark Matter, that actually really started to look at the Black speculative fiction. So basically, what started to happen that my images started to become synonymous with this new iteration of Afrofuturism, what Ronaldo Anderson calls Afrofuturism 2.0. Along with Dr. Adelifu Nama, back in 2015, 2014, at Loyola Marymount, we created these think tanks called Astro Blackness, which was some of the top scholars around Black speculation came together and actually started talking about these ideas more readily. And this is actually a while ago, as you can see, excuse me, before Black Panther kind of pushed Afrofuturism as a term that's now in the mainstream. So around the same time, I'm thinking about the fact that, we have the movement for Black Lives happening. We have all these different pushbacks against the prison industrial complex around organizing on a grassroots level. And a lot of these people are making Black speculative work. And so I coined the term Black speculative arts movement. 2015, I did a screenshot. I knew it was going to be important. So let me screenshot this because I could see it happening, that the connections between the mainstream ideas around Afrofuturism and also on the ground organizing was happening right in front of us. And so I want to align it back to the Black arts movement, which also had a lot of speculative aspects to it as well. So about a decade ago, me and my friend Stacey Robinson created this design fiction piece called Black Kirby. This was around the time that the Avengers movie made $1 billion worldwide. But at the time, his family, Jack Kirby's family, was not getting remuneration for his creations because his work was work for hire. And me and my friend Stacy were like, that's not right. I know it's like it's work for hire and that they own the rights to it, but it's $1 billion. And one of us said, like, well, they treating this brother like he's black. He's a Jewish American creator, but he's being treated like he's black, And then one of us said, yeah, it might as well be called Black Kirby. And so we actually thought that was a great idea. So we created this alternative space where Jack Kirby, the creator of the Hulk and Captain America and such, was a black man. And instead of using Judeo-Christian mythology, he was using like African-centered mythology from and also Egyptology and things of that nature. This became a really big show for us. But we launched this at Jackson State. We launched this at Jackson State. The first Black Kirby show was at JSU. I love JSU. I've been, I'm very proud of the fact that I used to be a professor there as well for 4 years in the art department. And, I always want to bring back that knowledge or bring back that experience, to my homeland. So these are some images from that. We can talk about these at length later if we need to. I'm trying to get through them. But basically what was starting to happen though is we were talking about this idea of how the cultural production space changes, when you start applying these to like pop culture idioms. So this is kind of like almost like a speculative Afrofuturist, satirical kind of like design fiction space. So these actually aren't real covers. They're like using the idea of a cover to kind of like create a particular type of tension with this real space and this imagined space. And so Stacy and I would just kind of play around with this. So it's almost like Black Kirby became kind of like a digital conjure man, like a two-headed doctor. And we would just pass, images from one to the other, and we would just remix them. And when people asked us who did them, we said, well, Black Kirby did them. So because we were also using it as kind of like a way to kind of talk about the way the museum spaces work. So around the same time, I started thinking about the idea of genre, right? So I started to note that Afrofuturism started to become like a kind of a touchstone for everything dealing with Black speculative culture. So Helen actually earlier said that me and my friend Damien adapted Octavia Butler's Kindred into a graphic novel, and Kindred has time travel in it, right? It's about a Black woman who gets inexplicably, she gets pulled back through time to slavery time, right? And she discovers that she's connected to this white family that she's descended from. But there's no TARDIS or DeLorean or anything, a time machine of any kind in the story. So it's an existential, almost magical time travel that's happening. And I was like, well, the thing else that was really tripped out about Kindred is that it actually has more akin with the Gothic than it does with a traditional science fiction tropes. So I came up with this term, the Ethnogothic. The Ethnogothic deals with primarily speculative narratives that engage with negatively affective, racialized, identity-situated psychological traumas via the traditions of Gothic tropes and technologies. And those actually include the grotesque other, body horror, haunted spaces, the idea of fictional artifacts, the doppelganger. If you look at like Kindred, it actually has more of those tropes than it does of like traditional science fiction tropes. I mean, literally, like Alice and Dana in the story are twins, so that's the idea of the doppelganger. The idea came up was that this isn't exactly Afrofuturism, but it's connected to it because basically the idea is that I always use the Bag Lady song by Erykah Badu as an example, where in Erykah Badu's Bag Lady song, she sees this bag lady with these things weighing off of her, these bags, and she's trying to get to this bus. So I would say, like, imagine that the bus is going to the Afrofuture and that these bags are filled with trauma, epigenetic trauma, oppression or whatever. So you have to open these bags up, name that monster, destroy that monster so you can get on that bus and go to the Afrofuture. So I started to think about like horror and the Gothic as a way to kind of deal with these notions of epigenetic trauma, different types of manifestations of trauma, through slavery and other types of disruptive issues that have happened to Black people, and how the horror becomes like this really very powerful technology to kind of move forward if you have the strength to deal with these issues. So what you do is you name that monster, destroy the monster, and then you can let it go and move forward. Because even in the song Bag Lady, she tells him to let it go, let it go, let it go. So in that vein, I created this character who is the fictitious cousin of Robert Johnson. His name is Frank Half Dead Johnson. And in the story, Blue Hand Mojo, he's also good. He's from Mississippi. He's a failed sharecropper. He is a great gambler, and he gets into a gambling game with the white man that owns the land that he's working, and he wins a lot of money. And of course, he freaks out about this because he knows that this man is going to come after him. So he basically goes home and tries to get his family going. They catch him and his family, and he actually, unfortunately, sees his family lynched in front of him, and he escapes with his life. He gets drunk on moonshine, goes down to the Crossroads, and makes a deal with the quote unquote devil. You know, we probably think that's probably Eshu Alegbedo, right? And he becomes a conjure man, and he gets the power to actually like exact vengeance against the racist white people that murdered his family. Then he realizes that he's made a horrible mistake, and he makes a secondary deal to serve the devil for a couple of 100 years if he could, you know, maybe earn the right to get, you know, his soul back. So the devil actually loans him half soul back. That's the name Half Dead Johnson, and it puts him on this trail to actually compose this blues song, because basically souls resonate with different types of, you know, vibrations. So Half Dead Johnson becomes this interlocutor for the devil, because he's trying to compose his blues song from these different damned souls. So anyway, here's some of the character designs and stuff. I won't like dwell on these too long, but this is Blue Hand Mojo, which is a current book that I've put out fairly recently. But a lot of these mythologies are based in my connections to Mississippi, as far as like the blues is magic, you know, these ideas of like racialized traumas and how we can deal with them. I'm actively trying to think about like these theoretical frameworks and how they become underpinnings for my art. So then comes Box of Bones. Box of Bones actually is about this character named Lindsey Ford, who is a Black woman from the South, who ends up at Berkeley studying folklore and mythology. And she's obsessed with this box that her grandfather told her about, that actually it basically houses these spirits that punish people that hurt Black folk throughout the diaspora. Some people call it the shadow box, some people call it the box of pain, most people call it the box of bones. And so the entire story is basically like her doing her field research for her dissertation. And a lot of the stories are flashbacks from different, like, you know, travelers' tales or like folklore and stuff like that. So they're all like flashbacks until she finds the box, and then this story shifts to being about her. So this project basically, it's taken a few years to get together because I was working on Kindred, so I actually had to work with different artists. But these creatures that are in the box are based off of actual like Black traumas. Like for instance, this is a sentient lynching tree called the Wretched. That's actually really where I get the title from, the France Fanon, the Wretched of the Earth, obviously. And the design of the character comes from a Toni Morrison quote from Beloved. The suffering is kind of like a manifestation of like the stereotype of the Black buck or the Black group pushed to the limit. It's almost like a demonic John Henry character. Then you have the Dark, who is kind of like he's the master of these creatures. He's almost like a shadowy manservant character. The Nobody, where I get the name for the Nobody from the song "Nobody Knows the Trouble I See," and it's kind of like the hollowing out of Black culture. It's almost like a giant bobblehead that controls your body, and then once it finishes, it takes your head, because, you know, it's an emptying out of culture. It's like selling the shell of culture. And then of course there's the Burden, which is a manifestation of like slavery. So it's like a sentient cotton sack that is pulling together these black slave parts. There's also the Night Doctor that represents racialized medical apartheid. And here's some of those designs. So the idea was to kind of create these monstrous figures that are kind of like, you know, really, really dark versions of like minstrel images, but kind of combine them with like some of the horrors of what happened to Black folk during slavery. And here's some pages from that. I'll go through these really quickly. So the first collection of this is about to come out in February from Rosarian Publishing. So I worked with a team of about 6 or 7 artists on this. I'm doing most of the colors on this. This is David Brame's work. You can see like his ink work and my color work. I love working with him. Like, I just feel like we're a really good creative team. I worked on several projects together. Okay, so really quickly, I want to talk about, I mentioned the term design fiction. So there's this book called Shaping Things by Bruce Sterling, and he talks about this idea of design fiction. I'm a graphic designer, so this really like piqued my interest. So basically, a diegetic prototype in design fiction is something that creates a story world. The idea of like creating a story, and inside of that story world, you have these objects that are designed to just have conversations, right? So they're called diegetic prototypes. So this idea of speculative design is basically deploying these ideas around, problems, different types of problem solving, right? So the best book about this is by Dunn and Raby. It's called Speculative Everything. But what's really interesting about how they thought about speculative design is they don't really talk about Afrofuturism or race or anything of that nature, right? Because I started thinking about the idea that what they're describing sounds like race. So I started thinking about like race as a designed object, right? So around the same time I'm thinking about this, I'm teaching at the University of Buffalo at the time. I created an art class called Race as Science Fiction because that's kind of what it is. So it was a semiotics class centered around this notion that race kind of functions like a design fiction or a discursive object. So 4 things kind of like generated some of these ideas. This is actually a show at the Schomburg Center in Harlem that was co-curated by myself and another JSU alum, Dr. Ronaldo Anderson, who's also like a top-notch Afrofuturist scholar. Sherry Renee Thomas's work on Black speculative fiction, Dark Matter, which to a certain degree was dealing with the idea of a living archive. Kevin Young, who used to be over this particular space and now is actually with the Smithsonian's Black Museum. He came up with this idea of the shadow book, the notion of an existing book being haunted by a book that was never written. Like, for instance, Ralph Ellison's second novel, for instance, haunts the existence of the existing novel, theoretically, right? John Confer's Data Thief is a really interesting trope. And also Du Bois's notion of the veil, which when he writes about the veil, it's almost like he's writing about a parallel universe. And then at the time we were doing this, we discovered another diegetic prototype called the megascope, which we'll get into in a second. So I started thinking about this curatorial exercise coupled with the exposures around speculative design and made me start thinking about race as a type of design fiction. We often refer to it as a system and a construct, right? And my whole thing is like, if we construct and consume space around it like it's a real thing, well, what if we looked at it like a designed object? What if we looked at it like a diegetic prototype? What if we thought about racist systems as very effectively designed deliverables or products that could be redesigned or even undesigned? So I came up with this notion called critical race design studies, an interdisciplinary design practice that intersects critical race theory, speculative design, design history, and critical making to analyze and critique the effects of visual communication, graphic objects, and their associated systemic mediations of racial identity. One of the things that started me thinking about this was Jim Crow signage. Jim Crow, of course, was, basically the legal oppression of Black folk. And inadvertently actually poor white people too, but that's a whole nother thing. But so those were municipal signs that were put up. Those were legal signs, which means that there was a system or a template for those signs to be made. So we're talking about a physical manifestation of a designed oppressive space. That's one particular thing I'm thinking about, but then also how those different types of systems get reappropriated by Black designers and kind of upend those things. So it's a new idea I'm working with. I'm kind of designing classes around that notion. But then I started looking for diegetic prototypes in Black speculative fiction. So what if there was a collection of Afrocentric musical instruments whose music was deadly, but only to white people? So this is a concept from Will the Circle Be Unbroken by Henry Dumas. It was written in 1966 during the Black Arts Movement. What if there was a pair of shoes that allowed you to fly? This is Mchawi, written in 1990 by the great Amiri Baraka. What if there was a chair that turned Black people into white people? This is from a story written during the Harlem Renaissance by George Schuyler called Black No More. This is written in 1931. This is a sci-fi concept, 1931. What if there was a device that could sense off-duty police officers? This is Pig Detector, written in 2000 by Mary Baraka. What if there was a device that allowed you to see through time and space and other dimensions? So this is a device called the Megascope that was from one of the 3 science fiction or speculative stories that W.B. Du Bois wrote. This was found in his papers by Britt Russert and Adrian Brown back in 2015. And the story is called The Princess Steel. And the device is used as a framing mechanism for a story where he critiques the U.S. steel industry through a metaphor that's also like a fantasy story. It's amazing, you know. So anyway, so Black people were speculated into existence, and that speculation was supported by generations of visual culture and design propaganda. Then we, the speculated, have used that same technology to critique society and the persistence of our disenfranchisement. So now I'm looking forward to the future, and I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully have enough time for a conversation.
For taking notes. So if you guys are out there, put up some black hands or some vanilla hands or whatever you got out there. We want to definitely thank Professor Jennings for that wonderful, wonderful presentation. I think we got time about 15 minutes or so today. So I think we should be good. And if not, Brother Wheeler will just turn us off in the middle. He has no problem.
Just shut it down.
Screen goes black. That means Brother Wheeler said that we've gone on too long. Well, I want to start with a couple of things. Because you're talking about ethnogothic, and could you talk a little bit about Afrofuturism being, and maybe not, so you can correct me, being a concept in many ways where spirituality or metaphysicality tends to usurp or replace technology as the driving center of the force, right? And so could you just talk a little bit about how that plays out in your work about visualizing the way that, you know, for African folk, spirituality is a concept of technology?
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, and so one of the things that kind of, like I started to lead me down that path was John Okonfor's film. It's the first time I really had thought about how that notion of technology was being used. You know, another thing that made me start thinking about that too was Beth Coleman's piece, Racist Technology, where she kind of like basically posited that if we do away with the silly notion that race actually means that we're different from each other, and if you just think about it as a prosthetic or like an extension of ourselves, then you really see that race functions more like a technology or a deliverable, you know? And so then I started thinking about, well, like that means religion and these different modes of faith, music, these different extensions of mankind can be considered a type of technology, because essentially a technology is like an extension of our thought processes through various types of systems, right? And yes, spirituality definitely becomes a huge part, I think, of an Afrofuturist notion. And that's another thing that I think really separates it from like a more westernized European notion of like science fiction of the future, where like the spiritual or these different types of folkloric magics are kind of like decentered or like considered to be low, you know. I would say that Afrofuturism privileges those ideas and also makes those things equivalent, you know, to a certain degree. You know what I'm saying? So there's this notion of like technological equivalence that happens that is just another type of technology, right? And so there's this really great book by Eric Davis, it was written, I think, 94, something like that. It's called Technosis, right? And the whole concept is about the conflation of spirituality and technology. But again, like a lot of these writers, they're not writing about Black spirituality per se. And I was like, so I just came with like, it's an Afro-technosis then, or it's a Black technosis, where like there is a merging, if you will, of like a traditional, like modernist way of thinking about technology and systems, but also this ancient spiritual, faith-based notion of like technology as well that conflates in Afrofuturism and other types of Black speculative culture. So I think that is a huge, I think that's one of the core differences, I believe. And so that comes out in my work, particularly in Blue Hand Mojo, because Blue Hand Mojo, that character lives into the future. And so he becomes part of what I call the system of what I call conjure punk. You probably heard of cyberpunk, right? Which is like this notion of like dystopic science fiction futures. But I was like, well, conjure is a technology. It's hoodoo. You know what I'm saying? It's a type of like, it's an offshoot of African diasporic belief structures that it also is remixed through different types of folk magics from Europe and other places. It starts in New Orleans and then starts going up into the Appalachian Mountains, right? But conjure is a spiritual practice too. So I was like, well, what's the difference between digital technology and conjure? There's not really. It's just how these things apply. So I came with this idea of conjure punk, where like, you know, conjure and hoodoo is being like reiterated through a digital technological application. So yeah, so he ends up being like a cyberpunk character, but with these hoodoo powers. So
cool. So we got two really great questions, but before we do, I just want to kind of connect another part to that first question, and then come to these two questions that we have in the chat room. So based on everything you just said, then it seems like to me that with Afrofuturism, it's also having a really interesting conversation about how we define what it means to be civilized. So that often the notion of who's civilized often has to do with how much mass destruction you can cause through technology.
Yes.
Whereas with Afrofuturism, the discussion is shifting how we define civilization with how one can commune or expand or come into contact with one's spirituality or metaphysicality to really unearth or unopen the fullness of what it means to be human. Is that a correct?
I think that is a really wonderful way to say that, because I often think about like this notion of, you know, the ancestors being a type of application or a type of technology. You know what I'm saying? The lower or different types of spirits that are invoked in, you know, practices like Santeria or Candomblé or Obea. You know, these particular different types of spiritual practices are really just conduits. If you think about Papa Legba or Eshua Legba, he's kind of a spiritual switchboard operator. You know what I'm saying? Think about it. And the other thing too is like the Loa and Voodoo and Vodun, you know, they upgrade themselves to deal with the issues at hand. You know, that's how the Haitian Revolution jumped off, where, you know, when you think about like a modern idea of like good and evil, it's, you know, in these African spiritual beliefs, it's more about context, you know what I'm saying, about these contextual things. You know, there's not such thing. There's no devil in voodoo, you know. It's these ideas of how these different spiritual practitioners deploy these spirits, right? So that's very much like a technological idea, because you can do a lot of harm with a technology, you can do a lot of good things with technology.
Very good. So I want to go to 2 questions we have in the chat, and then if we have time, we'll come back to some more. Wheeler says that with the current climate in America today, why do you think Black people should imagine themselves in the future?
That's a great question. There's this really wonderful book by Robin D.G. Kelly called Freedom Dreams, the Black Radical Imagination. Well, basically, you know, Kelly is stating that in order for us to actually progress, that we must first have we must first lift ourselves out of the impoverished imagination, you know what I'm saying? Or the poverty of the imagination, to think about ourselves in better spaces. So a lot of times when I'm talking about Afrofuturism, I always reference Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, right? Basically, you know, if you're thinking about different metaphors that he uses throughout his whole oratory career, one of them, of course, is the diegetic prototype of the mountaintop. Right. And I usually ask my students, I say, all right, take out your flip phones, take out your cell phones, and I want you to send me a GPS location of that mountaintop right now. And they can't do it, right? Because for 2 different reasons. One of all, it's a construct, and also we haven't made it there yet. So the other thing is that you actually have to utilize your imagination to be able to imagine yourself in a better space first. And all revolutions start from a radical imagination.
So essentially, King is creating the artistic vision.
That's right.
Where he wants his people to go.
That's right. And it's a metaphorical construct. So it's a primary idea about what a diegetic prototype does. It's an object that is created to have a discussion.
So then, coming to Mr. Wheeler's question, then what Afrofuturism does then is gives us the resources to imagine the future that we want, to escape or refashion the hell in which we currently exist. If that makes
There
sense.
you go. And what happens is that you utilize that storytelling, that radical storytelling, and you reify it in the real world. You know,
Okay.
because we're made of stories. You know,
Right.
you know your story.
Right.
We made of stories.
Right.
And
I was telling you
become
that
real.
you talk in stories more than you talk in straight essay language.
That's right. That's very true. That's why we're so addicted to stories anyway. What's next?
Exactly.
What's next? You know, so it's like, yeah. Anyway.
So I want to come to and in the chat, if I mess up your name, just please forgive me. Sister Simmons says that where do you think Afrofuturism fits with the traditional white European art exhibitions within the museum field today?
That's a great question. I know that for a fact that a lot of the museum institutions right now are rethinking not only how they display this work, you know, but also thinking about the systems that make up these traditionally actually white supremacist spaces. And a big space that is actually trying to transform that right now is the Met in New York. They recently had an exhibition featuring Wangechi Mutu's work. Sister Wangechi Mutu did these column designs. You know, if you've been to the Met, you've seen the Met, they have these spaces outside. And a lot of times these column designs are women that are holding up, or they almost like the columns that are holding up the space. Mm-hmm. So they allowed her to actually put these really beautiful, like Afrocentric kind of technological cybernetic images, sculptures into this page. And we had a discussion about it. I actually was invited to have a discussion about these particular pieces. Now, what's jumping off right now is that they're definitely thinking about a restructuring of how that particular institution functions. And I think this is happening in a lot of different institutions. And so I was part of a team of people who are advising this sister named Hannah Beekler, who was she was the set designer for Black Panther. And she's taken over this period room there where she is rethinking, she basically is positing a space where the Seneca Village population was not uprooted to make Central Park, because that was a Black space that was actually disrupted by the creation of Central Park. So This period room that she's creating is imagining what if that didn't happen. And this is actually at the Met. And so people like myself, Ryan Coogler, the brother Kwesi, who co-directed Black is King, were part of this advisory board. This particular exhibition and this period room is going to jump off in a year from now. And we just had a meeting about not only how to reimagine that space, but also how this can affect the institution's kind of like, you know, structure, the white structure that's there. So I think there's an interest now in using Afrofuturism as a tool to kind of reimagine what those institutions could be like. You know.
Okay, excellent. Got another great question, but before we get to that one, I want to ask you. I want to take you back, because the sister's question about museums got me thinking about something else. I want to take you back to you were broke college freshman.
Yes.
And so for a broke college freshman at Jackson State around the world, can you talk a little bit about not just the need, but how can, say, broke young creatives create the equivalent of museum spaces?
You know, that's a really great idea. I mean, I think it's a lot easier now because we have access to, a lot of people have access to digital technology these days. That's one thing, you know, is that, you know, with very little ends, you can actually create like a Tumblr space or something like that. But as far as like hacking into different types of public spaces, I used to encourage my students to kind of take over a space and do like a pop-up exhibit or something like that. I mean, these days, Instagram is a museum in your pocket. It's all about portability of culture. I think that now even people who have like not a lot of means, you know, might have access to like a library or some type of like digital platform where they can actually make something. There's downloadable applications that are relatively inexpensive. I use a program called Procreate that's only like $11. You know, now the setup is a little bit of money, but that app, you know, is only like $11. You know, a lot of the stuff I showed you was done on an $11 app. So, but as far as like the museum space, I mean, there's definitely like a system in place there. But if you treat the world as your museum, then I think you could go a long way. So I would say like using the past subversive types of technological spaces, making T-shirts. I mean, you can have an exhibition on a T-shirt, saying, or you can actually like, I don't want to encourage people to bomb people's buildings and stuff,
Right.
but there are different types of wheat pasting techniques and different types of street art that I think kind of upend notions of what the gallery space should be. So,
and I think a lot of it is also teachers understanding that part of our role is to create spaces for students.
Yes.
And making sure that teachers know that, hey, if there are rooms, there are buildings where you have creatives, that space for creatives, make sure that as teachers, we are moving young creatives to those spaces, without cost, without all of the kind of bureaucracy, making sure that that's there. Because I know that helped me. We would go and steal a classroom and have night of literature. And I shouldn't say that. Absolutely. We would go and find where they want to have a night class. I would walk the halls. I said, okay, no teachers having a night class here. We're going to have night of literature in here. And so, luckily the teachers knew we were doing that and let us have that space.
Yeah, see, that's a very similar thing. I mean, basically try to create, like you said, teaching to transgress, and also thinking about these, making these spaces less oppressive. And what you're talking about is what I call chitlin hacking. Is what I call
Right. So I want to go because I'm gonna come back to Sister Simmons' question, but I want to got to give a shout out to Dr. Rico Chapman.
Rico here. Oh,
finest, Brother Seasway. And also because his question, I wanted to start with this question. So I'm glad Brother Chapman came in and asked a similar question. So Dr. Chapman is simply saying, what role does will HBCUs play in shaping young scholars this somewhat young genre?
I think the role of the HBCU, and I'm very biased about this, being a graduate of a HBCU and also a former professor at HBCU, but the sense of self that I took to the PWIs that I went to school and taught at, is invaluable, because so much about the mission of the historically Black college is about the future, is about imagining better spaces, is about making dreams a reality. I think, I used to always say, like, when I talk about Afrofuturism, that one of the first Afrofuturists was the first slave that said, you know what, the slavery thing is not working for me. Follow this star and I shall get the heck out of here.
I need to reimagine a new place.
I need to reimagine the space. The other thing too is like, the Black utopias in people's heads when they were heading up time, out of the South during the Great Migration. I think, the Great Migrators, those are all Afrofuturist notions. So I think HBCUs are invaluable.
So I want to come back to Sister Simmons, and she's given us a great question just about the importance of festivals. She's talking, of course, specifically about a particular festival. So you can either address a question about that specific festival, the MLK NorCal's Black Comics Art Festival, or just the importance of festivals to, say, Afrofuturism and just Black visual artists in general.
Yeah. Well, basically a little bit of background. I'm one of the co-founders of that event. So I'm be like, yes, of course it's important, right? But so the brother that's behind MLK NorCal, Aaron Grizel, he's from the Bay Area. He's born and raised there. The MLK Foundation there is one of the largest celebrations of MLK's vision. They do like this really big march around the city, and they end up at the Yerba Buena Arts Center. And so we decided that, this actually might be a really great space to showcase Black creators, and now it's Black and Brown creators. It's called BCAF, the Black and Brown Comic Arts Festival. It's free to the public. It happens during Martin Luther King's birthday. We do events with the San Francisco Public Library, and what it does, it kind of like unify. It brings people across the Bay. It's a city-sponsored event as well. Brings in about 30,000 people to the entire event, and Aaron is the coordinator for all these different festivals that happen during that time. So I think in some ways it's a celebration of King's legacy, but it also is this. It really is trying to move towards that greater vision, and I think it's a wonderful space. I love working with BCAF. It's a lot of work. I don't know if you ever put on a comic book convention before, but it is not. Yeah, it's a lot of work. But I think people connect there. They find community there. And now that we've actually added the fact that this is also a space of empowerment for people who are Latinx as well. it definitely has moved, I think, forward. So I think those are different reasons why you should come and check it out. I think it's an important space. Also, too, in the Bay Area, you want to check out Afro Comic Con, which happens in Oakland. So, which is kind of like a partner event, sister event that happens in Oakland as well.
Couple of more questions in there, because we really appreciate you, and
this is great, man. I love talking about
home and dealing with the home folk, right? And but we want to be of your time that you've always given us. So a couple more questions. Number one, I don't know if you're familiar with a book by Dr. Howard Ramsey, Bad Men: Creative Touchstones for Black Writers. And what Dr. Ramsey says in that book, because it made me, when you were discussing Blue Hand Mojo.
Yeah, Mojo, yeah.
It made me think about what Dr. Ramsey is saying. So he's saying that over the years, Black writers have dealt with, quote, bad men, right? Rebellious men, whether it's Stagger Lee or right. Exactly. And so what he says is that what they've done is use the bad men image to kind of create a counter revolution, right? And that looking at, and so I guess what I want to do is kind of frame that in what you're doing with Mojo. Talk a little bit about how that outside bad man is kind of needed, because that's the person who has some of that fiber, who's unafraid to face white supremacy and all its ills.
That's right. That's right. And it's fun. What's the name of that book again before I answer that? Bad Men.
It's called Bad Men: Creative Touchstones for Black Writers, and it's by Dr. Howard Ramsey, who, look, he's not a Jackson State grad, but he's just as close. He's a Tougaloo grad, so I give him,
I'm totally. First of all, I'm totally buying this book right now.
And Dr. Ramsey just sold a copy.
Yeah, because I totally am with that. Because to me, Blue Hand Mojo is a combination of those kind of like bad men like that, like a Stagger Lee, or like a trickster character like a High John the Conqueror. I wouldn't say he's bad, but he actually does have like these trickster notions mixed with what they call the blues detective, which is like these black urban police detectives, like from what's his name? Coffin Ed and Gravedigger Jones. What's the brother's name? I can't think of it right now. He's a black detective writer. Anyway, not Walter Mosley. I can't. Cotton Comes to Harlem. That brother. Come on. I can't.
Shoot.
Yes, exactly. It's totally gone. Anyway, yeah. So I think that is brilliant. I think that is totally true. That these characters embody, like you said, they're a reification of those ideas. I think they're very important. I definitely want to read this book, because I could definitely see that fueling some ideas around Blue Hand Mojo, around Half Dead Johnson, because he's definitely that figure that stands in strong resilience against white supremacy, but also is a wielder of that black technological magic, ancient magic, and the rage of losing his family, that is also that whole narrative that is embodied in that character. He's straight up out of Mississippi, and actually I have a backstory for his father. His father is actually like this character that fathered him while he was possessed by Shango. Yeah, it's gonna be called Smokestack Lightning. It's another story.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so connecting that quickly, when you were discussing race as a design structure, it made me think about all of the work that Samuel Delaney had done in semiotics, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so it then made me think about what Wright has Bigger Thomas say about going and seeing the billboards for the movies and only seeing white faces.
That's right.
And Bigger only ever seeing white pilots. And so talk a little bit about how Afrofuturism can, both, from a literary standpoint and a visual standpoint, be used to kind of break what Samuel Delaney is talking about, say a semiotic prison, right? The way signs are created to imprison black folks.
That's exactly right. I mean, yes. So Delaney's a big influence, and but also, semiotics definitely, as far as like the study of signs. Also, the study of, because what I used to always say to my students is like, what you don't show is just as important as what you do show. And so a lot of times Afrofuturism deals with what I call the shape of an absence, this notion of a reimagining of Black subjectivity. Again, it goes back to this notion of how like the images that were created to imprison us were stereotypes. I mean, stereotypes are prisons. And that's actually one of my favorite things about, recently that I saw in Lovecraft Country, particularly the episode where the little girl has been haunted by those stereotypes. That's how they function. They always try to keep you from moving forward. So I think Afrofuturism gives us a way to critique those systems, but also create and imagine new systems. And if not Afrofuturism, and Afro-surrealism, if you want to borrow from Amiri Baraka's take on Henry Dumas's work, right? Or like I said, Ethnogothic, or black horror, or the Afro speculative or Afro fantasy. These different things are like recentering Black voices and having the audacity to kind of like rearticulate what the subject should look like or could look like.
When you were discussing, you guys were creating covers, right, as a social political statement. Also, what I found wonderful, if you could talk about creating covers, not just necessarily as a placeholder, but for an inspiration for people to create what hadn't been created.
That's right.
Right. Toni Morrison, someone asked Toni Morrison if she went to an island, right, what book would she take with her? And she would say, I wouldn't take a book. I would write the book I want to read.
Exactly.
And maybe about that, here you guys were creating these covers for books that didn't exist.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Just a little bit about how that's the role of Afrofuturism, I'm sorry, in creating art that creates the vision that we want to see exist.
That's right. And so what me and Stacey were thinking about with Black Kirby was like the idea of judging a book by its cover, which is an interesting cliche, but also the idea that design has a particular set of affordances and power, So when you see something that looks slick and looks designed, you automatically assume a type of authority because of the form that it's in, right? So when people see a book cover, they think there's a book in there, right?
Right.
So so we're taking notes from stuff like the idea of a shadow book, like I said. Like for instance, if you look at like Octavia Butler's books, The Parable of the Sower, Parable of Talents, there are shadow books inside that book because Lauren Olamina's books don't exist. They're used as diegetic prototypes to talk about the bigger story. So her diary that is like throughout the story, that book doesn't exist. Or these different excerpts from the books of the living, those books don't exist. So they're redacted shadow books. Or more recently, if you look at The Intuitionist, Colson Whitehead's book, The Intuitionist, Theoretical Elevators, that book doesn't exist. But it's actually quoted throughout the book. So it's like, it's redacted on purpose. It's this really interesting, beautiful redaction is happening. So that's things that we're referencing. A lot of people thought these books actually existed and want to see the books. And so it forced us to actually start making stories about it because people wanted to see the stories, but they're actually just using the affordances of design and the power of design to actually make fun of the fact that these things didn't exist and they should, And
yet you ended up creating the very thing, right? You ended up creating the very thing for which you were given a vision to other people to go.
That's right. Yeah. So it's a call and response, so to speak.
There we go. So
it's really speaking to an opening, to something that should exist but didn't. And it's like it makes you look at the space more.
I would be remiss if I didn't actually talk a little bit about how you got involved with the Kendrick Project and how that all came to fruition.
Oh yeah, for sure. So originally, me and my friend Damien, we got the call to do the Kendrick book. It was a competition that Beacon Press put out, like back in the early 2000s, like 2008 or so. We worked really hard on that proposal, and we didn't get it that time around. Someone, a Black woman got it. Then about 2012, the book hadn't come out at that time. And me and Damien were speaking about our other book, Black Comics, because we curate work around Black independent comics, and so we were on a panel for the film industry, for the Black film industry, with Robin Givens as the host. It was weird. So I got a chance to hang out with her. She was the curator, the moderator, and it turns out that her son is a big comics fan, so we actually ended up giving her a copy of the book for her son. So anyway, so I'm walking around before Damien comes to this is at Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con. And I'm showing other projects that we're working on. And I go to Abrams Comic Arts, and the lady there, oh, I'm forgetting her name right now. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm forgetting my editor's name. That's terrible. she was the editor for the book, and she was looking for a an artist and writer team for this book project. So she really liked our work, and she said that she was interested in doing something about Octavia Butler. Had I heard of Octavia Butler? And I was like, yes, I have. What are you trying to do? And she was like, Kindred. And I was like, Kindred? What? But then I remembered that the book hadn't been, that the graphic novel hadn't been done. Mm-hmm. And, she basically was like, this, you guys would work great for this project. And so we ended up, Abrams Comic Arts actually ended up getting the rights to the book. And it was a work for hire kind of situation where we ended up, being able to work on the project. So, we turned it around and people didn't hate the book. And
no, quite the opposite. People loved it.
Yeah, it turned out pretty. Sheila Keenan. What I was doing was clicking through the book so I could find because Sheila was awesome. I can't believe I had a brain fart and didn't remember her name. But Sheila used to be senior editor at Abrams Comic Arts and was very, very instrumental and a great editor. And then we had total buy-in from the estate as well. So,
what was the most challenging part about doing that project?
Besides drawing 240 pages in 5 months.
Wow,
that was challenging.
Wow. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, the weight of her legacy is very difficult. I mean, we often say Beyonce's Beehive is pretty bad, but yeah, nothing on Octavia Butler fans. So there's a huge weight, that we had to, had to deal with. I think that was one of the things, and also the act of trauma. I mean, basically, every time that you drew it, you had to ink it and then color it. So it's almost like you're re-traumatizing yourself. I mean, there's parts of it where I had to really rest, and I felt like me and Damien both felt like we were enslaved by the book in some ways. Right. And there's also parts where I openly wept because of just what I was drawing, like the whipping scene, for instance, in The Fire, the second chapter, where she's hiding in the bushes and her ancestors being whipped, it's very powerful. And so I was weeping onto actual comic book pages. It was like, it was bad. Yeah. So it was a tight turnaround. There was a lot of pressure. The rewards could be very high, but also failure would be abysmal. And so what happened was the book, is still a best-selling book. I mean, I think we sold probably 250,000 copies of the book worldwide. It's in 5 different languages now. And it's the reason why I have an editorial position as a roving editor with Abrams now, because of the success of that book. So I owe Octavia a lot, and she's still opening doors for people, So yeah, so the first book from that line of books is a Nnedi Okorafor story that I adapted. It jumps off in January. So I'm actually editing graphic novels by other people for this line of books from the same publisher now, specifically around speculation and people of color.
So now you're opening doors for other folk.
Trying to. So far, so good. Our first 4 come out, January 5th is the first book, and then we have several in the spring. One of them is a short comic about the Tulsa Race Massacre, actually, that Stacey Robinson drew. It's called Across the Tracks.
Cool. And then we're finding that graphic novels are some of the best ways to teach history to young people. Oh yeah, definitely. And then Ronaldo Anderson wrote the contextualizing essay for it. Keep it at home. So. Right. So a couple of more, and then we'll let you go. When you're discussing Box of Bones,
yes,
right, I kept thinking about that central character, and I kept thinking about Zora Neale Hurston's work in folklore.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about how you see that character kind of connected to the work that Zora Neale Hurston was doing, particularly folklore, in reclaiming our lore and reclaiming ourselves and reclaiming our power?
I think, Zora Neale Hurston is one of my totem spirits. I mean, just the work that she was doing was groundbreaking. Once I went, and when did I read Wrapped in Rainbows? Fairly recently, I think maybe a couple of years ago. And I was just blown away by how much I didn't know about her. And I was just like, it's a damn shame. But Lindsey Ford is the main character. She's definitely like the child of Zora Neale Hurston. She's Southern, kind of like not necessarily non-binary, but queer Black woman from the South, who came up on the blues and folk stories. and her blind blues man grandfather, tells her about this box that took the woman he loved and took his sight with it, and so she's like, yeah, whatever. And then she starts seeing these stories throughout the diaspora, and she becomes obsessed with the story, and then starts to weave it together, and she starts to realize that maybe this thing actually exists. And then she then realizes that she is connected to this story, like, by blood almost, and so so her and her partner are gallivanting across the world chasing the stories around this box. So I could definitely see like Zora Neale Hurston being a direct influence on that for sure.
So we're gonna end with two questions. I'm gonna pick one from Doc Chapman. He said, and you discussed it a little bit, but if you want to elaborate about Planet Deep South first being held at Jackson State, and then just what Planet Deep South is designed to do.
Right. And it's funny because usually when I do this talk, because this is actually a truncated version of a talk I gave at UC Berkeley last year about my work. And so the idea came from the fact that when we think about science fiction, a lot of times we don't think about the Black South as a space of futurity, But really, if you think about it, a lot of the Afrofuturist icons are either inspired by the South or out of the South. Like George Clinton was born in the South,
right?
Arkansas, Alabama. I forgot which one. The man that became Sun Ra, Henry Blount, was born in down south. You have people like John A. Williams, right, who was from Mississippi, who wrote The Man Who Cried I Am, which is an alternative speculative space, and also a time travel narrative, Captain Blackman. This is his brother from Mississippi. So you have these. He's part of the Black Arts Movement. Henry Dumas was from the South. So we started thinking about the fact that Janelle Monáe situates herself in Atlanta, and we think about outcasts and these different ideas around, the Great Migration. I mean, if you situate people like Zora Neale Hurston and Dr. King and Medgar Evers as futurists, they're Afrofuturists. They're thinking about a better space, and a lot of these political notions are coming out of the South. So me and Dr. Chapman, met and we're talking about this, and decided that we should do a symposium / conference / Black speculative shindig at Jackson State, and that was the first one. And it was held at the Kofo Center, actually, primarily, in different parts of, and actually also at the Margaret Walker Center and places like that too. But there's art shows and things of that nature. But some of the top speculative authors in the world actually came to Jackson, So, and I talked to my students about that. Imagine essentially being in a blues club with some of the top scholars from in a particular area, and we had people from all over the world, coming to Mississippi to talk to each other about Blackness and speculation in the South. The idea of like reclaiming not just the Gothic, scary aspects of how people think about the South, but the future, the beautiful imagination that comes out of the South too. You know what I'm saying? So that's what Planet Deep South was. At first, it was like Planet South, and that was what I came up with. And Enrico was like, no, Planet Deep South.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it, Planet Deep South. So now, since then, we've actually had a sister spinoff at San Antonio, University of San Antonio in Texas, and also we just did another one this past February that was put together by himself and Dr. Clint Fluker. So a lot of the different spaces in Atlanta from the university system in Atlanta hosted the last Planet Deep South. So it moves around, but it's in the South, and it's celebrating Black futurity and from a Southern fried mentality, so to speak. So,
and it's like you said, that whole reimagining that you were discussing, right? The notion that for the people who stayed or kept their connections to the South, they did so because the evil and hell of the South never destroyed the true vision of the goodness that it contains.
That's right.
I think that Planet Deep South really recalls us to understand that underneath that hell is a soul and a spirit that will not die, and if allowed to breathe, it could be a paradise unlike none other.
Mm-hmm. And as Outkast likes to say, the South got something to say.
There you go. There you go. So I'll let you end on. You said it, but I first of all again want to thank you. Just want to end. You said it, but I know I want folks to know that no matter where this brother is, no matter what he does, his love is always for Jackson State, always for coming home to Mississippi, and so we're always just we're proud of him, but we also appreciate that he reps Jackson State and reps the South no matter where he is. And so I just want you to take whatever small portion of time you really discussed it, but just tell us, what did you get from Jackson State, or what portion of whatever you got from Jackson State that enables you to do all the brilliant things that you're doing today?
You know, I think the spirit of communion, you know, the spirit of like really understanding the dream that Jackson State represents, you know, the camaraderie. You know, I have friends that I'm still friends with. I mean, I went to school with Ronaldo Anderson, you know what I'm saying? So I used to make flyers for him when he was promoting clubs and stuff. So it's like, we talk about that all the time. And that, I don't know, let me tell you a story. Like, so when I talk to my students about what it meant to be on campus in the late 80s into the early 90s, I remember being a student on you know, probably at the time, I think it was, I forgot what the boys' dormitory is. Not Allen. No, what's the other one? The men's, oh man, the two top floors of
Dixon, Stewart.
What do you call it?
Dixon or Stewart?
Yeah,
Dixon. Okay.
So, anyway, so I remember like on Thursday nights when the Cosby Show and A Different World would play, the entire campus would stop for that 1 hour.
Right.
For 1 hour, nobody did nothing but watch television. No homework was being done. It was after dinner in the dining, in the cafeteria, and then you could hear the whole campus laugh together.
Oh, wow!
If you listened,
right,
you hear the entire campus laughing together. I'll never forget that feeling that I was part of something bigger, you know. And I think it's that bigness that I take with me, and that love. I found a lot of myself at Jackson State. And that's why I came back to help try to build the art department for a few years too, after I got my degrees. And then I realized, like, in some ways I could help Jackson State more by trying to be a little bit bigger myself. You know, and that's actually one of the reasons why it broke my heart to leave. But I knew that there was things I could do in the world that actually could shine back, because I always bring stuff back to Jackson State.
No, that's you know, and that's the thing about it is you use your talents to help the world, but you always use your talents to help. And it's funny because I'm thinking about those dates, like we overlapped at Jackson State.
Mm-hmm.
I arrived at Jackson State as a freshman in '87.
Oh, so, yeah, we did overlap because I was 89. So.
Yes, so we overlapped, and I got my undergrad and grad there. So, and I want to give a shout out to Ben Bradley. He's always supporting us, brother Ben. So, you know, Dr. Crump, if you want to come in and cut us off, because, you know, we like those preachers who said we ain't come to preach, and then we keep you for 3 more hours.
Exactly.
I ain't come to preach this evening, but
since I'm here,
there you go. The scripture has been laid on me.
Well, they keep telling you, I'm just gonna hold you for a few minutes.
There you go.
A few minutes, and that's an hour later. Just a few minutes. No, I just thank you all so much. I enjoyed it. It was absolutely brilliant. I've been taking notes too, Celie, so I have 2 pages full, and I'm ready to go buy, spend my money, and promote.
You just sold the book, that Bad Man book. I just bought that right in front, like in real time. I bought that book. So
Dr. Howard Randall and somebody in the chat bought one. So we sold 2 books of Bad Men.
That's like $50.
So let the publisher know Black folks is buying books out here.
Yes, we are. We are spending money on them. I got my money set to the side, ready to go. But thank you all so much for your participation, as they say in church. Thank you so much for sharing so much knowledge with us. I'm so excited about it, and I'm so glad that we did it this way so that people who weren't able to stop by tonight can still stop by and, you know, see this magic that is happening right here. I will remind us that I am correct that the conversation on Black Boy is Thursday, not Wednesday. I got that mixed up. But again, it's at 6 o'clock Central Standard Time. So please stop by and join us for that conversation as well. If there's nothing else, thank you and good night.
Sheila in the chat. Hey, Sheila. You know how Black folks
Sheila, we need to meet one day.
Oh man, you know what? I just turned on the comments. I was like, oh, there's a bunch of people. I was like, where's he seeing these people? Oh, never mind. I see him. Hey, how y'all doing? Bye.
My former student, Miss Drake, how you doing? You turn us off. Tell Wheeler he can turn us off because we just gonna be we into the Black portion of the show and shout now.